This is CBC Vancouver News.
I'm pretty pissed off, not gonna lie. We deserve better.
Renters in a Victoria area high-rise are ordered out of their homes. The building has been deemed unsafe again. From beach booze
I mean, they've been drinking at these beaches for decades.
to public pool swimwear.
You know, I've never seen people expose their genitals or whatever in the swimming pool, so I'm not too worried about it.
New rules for imbibing are coming to the Vancouver Sand and for taking a dip.
Fixing a 400-seat geodesic dome is not an easy situation.
Big upgrades for a big dome. Science World is undergoing some expensive repairs. Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Dozens of people who called an apartment building in Greater Victoria home are wondering where they're going to live now. The entire high-rise, filled with rental units, had to be evacuated because of structural dangers. And as the CBC's Tanya Fletcher reports, the building has been deemed unsafe before.
For the second time in just over 3 years, major structural defects have caused an emergency evacuation of this building.
I'm pretty pissed off, not gonna lie. We deserve better.
Late Monday, the city of Langford pulled the occupancy permit, leaving the dozens of people who live here in sudden limbo.
It's kind of distraughting. We were just trying to live, trying to get kids to school, trying to get our jobs done.
The same thing happened in 2019. The building was new at the time, but nearly 20 problems with its design, including seismic and foundational issues, forced all tenants out just days before Christmas. The engineer who designed it was fined and banned from the industry. The 90-unit building was then fixed, renamed, and again approved for occupancy last year. But this past weekend, the oversight body for engineers in BC told the city there are significant safety issues with the remediation work being done.
Through that initial inspection, there remains what they consider potential ongoing life risk situation.
Centurion Property Associates owns the building and put out this statement saying, quote, "At this time, it's still too early to provide a firm update on when work will be completed. We're still collecting information from the engineers for review and there are no firm timelines available." The company goes on to say it will listen to residents and do everything it can to support them in finding other accommodations.
Well, they gave us a list of hotels that apparently they'll pay for.
But some renters say they don't feel supported.
It's overwhelming. I have to change everything. Like I have to get my dog out of there. I'm finishing my semester right now, so I don't know if I can have access to my computer right now.
Centurion says rental contracts have been ended and it's offering each leaseholder $1,000. For many, that's not the point.
How does this sort of thing happen twice? Where was the city? Where were the inspectors? How come everybody missed this twice?
Questions they worry they may never get the answers to. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
You will soon be allowed to legally crack a cold one at various beaches around Vancouver. After years of talking about it, the Park Board last night approved 7 beaches where people 19 and older can drink alcohol, even though beachgoers have been doing just that for years. Starting in June, you'll be allowed to legally enjoy an adult beverage at Spanish Banks, Jericho Beach, Locarno Beach, Kitsilano Beach, Second Beach, the beach at New Brighton Park, and the sandy area on the south side of Trout Lake. 40 parks will also be open for drinking, most of them year-round. A few smaller ones will be summer only as they're near schools. We asked beachgoers what they think.
Well, I mean, I think it's a nice offering. I'm sure it's going to pose certain problems, but I think if people are responsible with it, then it can be something that can work.
So I think if you drink responsibly, you can drink everywhere. The problem is not where you drink. The problem is how much you drink.
And people actually are going to drink anyway, whether they've been drinking at these beaches for decades.
The board has also approved new rules around what you can wear at a public pool. A bathing suit, swim trunks or board shorts, t-shirts and shorts, bikini, swim hijab, leggings and a tunic, or a rash guard and wetsuit are all fine. You cannot wear a garment or item meant for sex or an intimate purpose, and you can't wear clothes that absorb water and get heavy, like jeans, sweatpants, and long, flowy things. Staff say bare breasts are allowed, but your swimwear must fully cover your genitals. So what do people think?
You know, being in a public place, you should be, you know, the appropriate bits covered. But as far as determining, like, you can wear that and you can't wear that, it's really about policing women's bodies, which I don't like at all.
I know some older people might be, you know, embarrassed about it. I guess it's so, but it has to be for everybody. So maybe they should have more coverage, you know. So. But yeah.
People are liberal here, and you know, I've never seen people expose their genitals or whatever in the swimming pool, so I'm not too worried about it.
The new rules were brought in after the board said staff at pools had to deal with some incidents regarding swimwear at the public pools. One of this city's most famous landmarks is getting a financial injection from the province to help pay for some much-needed repairs. From the outside, Science World may look modern, but as Justin McElroy reports, there are serious problems inside.
Science World. It's an iconic building, the city's only geodesic dome, and featured prominently as a city landmark ever since it was created for Expo 86.
Finding our place in tomorrow today. Vancouver.
But today, there are problems, like leaks in the roof, requiring Tupperware. The roof has holes. The outdoor lights don't work. The air conditioning is faulty. And the nonprofit put in charge of running Science World decades ago doesn't actually own the land or the building.
Fixing a 400-seat geodesic dome is not an easy situation, but we are working on some solutions.
Enter the provincial government for a classic good news announcement.
We're using $20 million to support critical infrastructure construction. This is going to include repairing the leaking dome.
One that could only take place in Science World.
So we have some work to do here at Science World, but also around the province.
Scientists of all ages, may I have your attention, please?
Of course.
Starting in 10 minutes, it's the balloon show.
But the reality is, Science World doesn't need $20 million. After decades of deferred maintenance, the actual price tag is around $100 million.
There's only so much money that can go in from a charity into big infrastructure challenges like this.
It's why Science World will also be going on an extended fundraising drive.
Watch your wallets, we'll be coming.
But why is it in this situation in the first place? Part of it is how Science World was set up. A nonprofit in a gray area, on land owned by the city in a building owned by the province. But it's also how Science World was actually built, intended to be a temporary structure.
I want to give huge credit to Science World and their team, extending the life of this dome beyond the originally planned 6 months to here we are 36 years later, still going strong. But like so many of the infrastructure challenges we face across the province, it has been neglected for too long.
So yes, there are plenty of good feelings around Science World, but it will take more than just that to keep it going for tomorrow and today. Justin McElroy, CBC News.
Former firefighters told a coroner's inquest they were delayed in checking Miles Gray's condition because Vancouver police officers kept them back. Gray was the unarmed man who died after being beaten by police in 2015. He was left with a broken eye socket and ruptured testicles, among other severe injuries. Retired Burnaby Fire Captain Jay Campbell testified today that a police officer told him to stay at street level after the engine arrived. He says he understood that meant Gray was not under control. A specialized life support paramedic also testified that Gray's bruising was so severe, at first, he couldn't tell what race Gray was. Flight attendants rallied at YVR today as part of their union's countrywide effort to get rid of unpaid work. CUPE's airline division claims flight attendants are paid for the hours spent on a moving plane, but work done on the ground, like safety duties, service prep, and boarding and deplaning, are not paid. The union says flight attendants work an average 35 hours each month without compensation. CUPE flight attendants for Air Transat are negotiating a new collective agreement right now. Contracts with airlines like Air Canada and WestJet are set to expire in the coming years. We are 1 week into one of Canada's largest ever strikes. More than 100,000 federal workers are out on the picket lines. And as the job action enters its second week, the CBC's Kate McKenna has a look at where negotiations stand.
Workers from across the country, spanning many federal departments, have spent a week on the picket lines. Some of them say they'd rather be back at work, but they say this strike is important because it could set a Canadian precedent on issues like wages and the right to work from home.
I like being a librarian, so I would rather be doing that than standing here and walking back and forth for 4 hours and cheering when cars go by. But I still think we have ground left to gain, and I think that's important.
In Ottawa, hundreds of strikers crossed the Portage Bridge between Ottawa and Gatineau, blocking traffic for a short time.
Hello, Justine! Can you hear us?
Strikers also limited access to the Prime Minister's office and the Treasury Board headquarters. PSAC says it's escalating its tactics to try to pressure Ottawa into a deal. Federal ministers say they support the right to strike, but they're monitoring disruptions.
We are in touch with ports, with airports, making sure there are contingency plans. But so far, we're focusing on the negotiation table.
The Treasury Board says the sides are still negotiating and still making progress, but wages are a sticking point. So is the union's request to allow employees to work from home.
Telework is a management right. I think we can be creative at looking at how we can review the telework directive, which is the conversation that we're having.
Mona Fortier says the Treasury Board is offering a 9% raise over 3 years. The union has asked for a 13.5% raise over that same time. For now, the government says it's focused on getting a deal done, but in the meantime, Canadians can expect delays, doing things like renewing their passport and having paperwork processed. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Gatineau, Quebec.
Renowned singer, actor, and civil rights icon Harry Belafonte has died. He rose to fame in the 1950s with hits like the Banana Boat song, also known as Day-O.
Work all night on a drink of rum. Daylight come and we won't go home.
Belafonte died of congestive heart failure at his home in New York. He was 96. He recorded more than 30 albums and was so popular he was invited to play at venues that black singers were banned from. He was also an outspoken civil rights activist and friends with Dr. Martin Luther King. In February 1995, he performed here in Vancouver and spoke to CBC News about what he had in store for his BC fans.
She does not lazy dance her hands on me. She does not talk no pretty talk. She pleasures silently.
It's really rooted in third world harmonies, themes, rhythms. That's where I got my start. But if I were to pick someone who would perhaps represent the closest to our sound, I would have to say that would be Paul Simon's Graceland. I came from an environment that was terribly, terribly oppressed. I grew up in Harlem. I was born in New York. My parents were immigrants who had come to America looking for the American dream, and instead they found the American nightmare. They had a very difficult time, and I always vowed that I would follow my mother's footsteps and always do battle with the enemy, always do battle against oppression and racism. There's always going to be evil. There's always those who are driven by greed and the quest for power that will do mischief to humankind. And we just have to be on top of it. This April, I go to Kansas City. I play the male lead in, excuse me, the male lead in Bob Altman's picture called Kansas City. I just finished starring in a movie with John Travolta. And it's in the can. It'll come out in the fall. They're editing now.
What's it called?
It's called A White Man's Burden.
Touches soft skin to skin. How much too soft? Her fire's burning me. Her fire's burning me.
There will be no more loopholes where airlines can claim a disruption is caused by something outside of their control.
Canada's Transport Minister says changes are coming to the Airline Passenger Rights Charter. What does this mean for you? We'll get into that next. Hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. Is an Alberta artist to blame for all the mice evading traps and feline foes this year? Interesting question. Jeff DeBoer makes armor for whiskered warriors that has been celebrated by collectors for decades. He let CBC News into his studio to chat about why he does what he does and some of the challenges being an artist who arms small creatures.
The thing I have in common with Walt Disney and Steve Jobs is for all three of us, it started with a mouse. I'm Jeff DeBoer, and I'm a visual artist. When people say, well, what do you do for a living? Well, obviously I make museum-quality suits of armor for cats and mice. I've had this amazing lifetime fascination with history and, of course, armor. When I was growing up, my father was a sheet metal fabricator, so I had access to the tools and some knowledge. By the time I was in high school, I was actually building my first suit of armor. A few years after that, I was at the Alberta College of Art and Design in the jewelry department, and in 1986, I had this epiphany that my skill sets were now in this small scale, and I had this history with armor, and I realized that I could make a small suit of armor. So I thought, well, that's small. I could make a suit of armor for a mouse. So in 1986, my whole life changed. In my universe, it's really this world of exploring history as cats and mice as a metaphor or an analogy for human history. When do the mice rebel? When do the cats and mice work together? Do cats fight each other? Do mice fight each other? Those are the kinds of questions that I think my work provokes without me actually having to write them. First, there's just sort of the rough idea in your head. Then do some concept drawings potentially, or do scale modeling. Quite often I will just model in clay now to visualize the forms and start to draft patterns from that, and then start to make the parts. And if the parts fit, you keep going. If they don't fit, you draft the pattern and do that again. So it can be quite iterative. For the most part, I'm working in steel, brass, nickel, copper, fairly inexpensive materials. I'm happy to just charge by the hour for my work, and I think that's fair. So a suit of mouse armor can be $5,000, and a suit of cat armor can be $40,000 to $50,000. The kinds of people who are buying my work, I think, is just a huge spectrum. There are just what you call maybe ordinary people to celebrities. I think the one thing that most of them would have in common is they're probably interested in history and they're interested in art. And they also like to have something in their house that's meaningful, not just stuff. My work was never intended to actually be worn by a cat or a mouse. I think that people's imaginations do a much better job of that than you could ever do by actually doing it. When you first have your break in the art world and you become the cat and mouse guy, there's a fear that that's all you're ever going to be. And certainly I've gone on to do large public works, but the whole time I was coming back to doing a cat here or a mouse there. And now I'm really excited about maybe just focusing on the cat and mouse thing for the rest of my life. And the thing that's come to my mind is that all these years I thought I was making suits of armor for cats and mice, and it turns out they were making me.
The federal government has announced plans to address complaints from air travelers by overhauling its Airline Passenger Rights Charter. Among the key changes, airlines would be required to provide compensation for delayed baggage. Passengers would also be given compensation for delays or cancellations by default.
There will be no more loopholes where airlines can claim a disruption is caused by something outside of their control for a security reason when it's not. And it will no longer be the passenger who will have to prove that he or she is entitled to compensation. It will now be the airline that will need to prove that it does not have to pay for it.
For more on these changes, CBC News spoke with John Graddick earlier tonight. He's a McGill lecturer and the coordinator of the university's aviation management program.
It changes the onus for managing disruption. I think the airlines are now going to be considered guilty until they prove themselves innocent of a delay, and I think that's a good thing. The question now is going to be, how do you do that? I think that there's a long ways to go before we are close to the European model. I think, you know, the European model basically says that only extraordinary circumstances are acceptable to allow the airline not to pay compensation. The minister was quite clear that there will be a list of exemptions that will be discussed and agreed upon. I don't think, you know, I'm not sure that they will be extraordinary limitations. I think there will be some leeway to provide the airlines with a continued exemption.
April is Autism Acceptance Month. It focuses on inclusion and showing support. Valeria Corimanocchio has the story of a student from southwest of Montreal who wrote and illustrated a book based on her own experience.
Brother Robin by Annabelle Adewunmi, which is me.
Annabelle Adewunmi is on what you could call a book tour.
And Robin loves peanut butter.
Today she's at St. Willibrord Elementary School in Chateauguay to read and present her book, Our Brother Robin.
This book is about a robot named Robin who has autism, and it talks about his struggles and what he loves to do and what are his special talents.
Annabelle is on the autism spectrum and wanted to promote acceptance.
Autism is not something that you should be scared of. It's just a way of thinking. And it makes your brain work a little differently, but it doesn't mean they're not human.
In her book, she explains what autism is and behaviors that can be associated with it.
But Annabelle has included such frank and clear explanations of things that people sometimes find off-putting. Right? So when there's a part in the book where she's talking about what stimming is and what that looks like and what it feels like and the reason that people do that, and in giving that explanation, it demystifies it and it helps us move towards acceptance of autism as opposed to awareness of autism.
Shmuel says that goes a long way.
To have that information from the perspective of someone who is living that life in the terms that they understand, in the terms that other people can understand, I feel like it opens doors that were previously closed.
Annabelle's book is available on Amazon. Over 70 copies have been sold so far, and she's already working on her next one.
What do you think this is?
His brother.
Right, his brother.
Valeria Corimanocchio, CBC News, Chateauguay.
There's a live shot of Harbour Centre and Grouse Mountain floating above. Amy Bell will have your BC-wide forecast with some sun after this.
Among the many minerals produced at Kamenko's smelter and trail are germanium and antimonide, kinds of crystals. We can't show them to you because Kamenko allows no one to see their production. Kamenko doesn't want to advertise that the crystals could end up in South Africa, in the guidance system of missiles and in the sights of South African Army weapons. For 2 years, the crystals have been sold to the University of Pretoria, but critics say they've gone straight to the Army.
The export is clearly making Canadians complicit in the oppression in South Africa.
The anti-apartheid network has been lobbying Ottawa to stop the flow of the crystals to South Africa.
Those are direct tools of the repression of the black majority in South Africa, and Canada can play a role. External Affairs should be blocking the export of those things, not approving the export of those kinds of minerals.
Last week, External Affairs Minister Joe Clark said the latest shipments could leave for South Africa because they will not be used for any military, defense, or police purposes. But late this afternoon, External Affairs announced that Kamenko has voluntarily decided to halt the exports until the Canadian government has a chance to make sure that the crystals don't end up in South African guns. Andy Orr, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Join Leanne Young at Vancouver Magazine's 34th Annual Restaurant Awards on May 15th. The prestigious awards honor the city's greatest places to eat and the folks who make them special. For tickets, visit vanmag.com. And the Doxa Documentary Film Festival returns May 4th to 14th. Enjoy thoughtful and engaging documentaries, special presentations, industry events, and more. Get your tickets at doxafestival.ca.
Something you don't see every day in our province, but it is special. An eagle out for a swim. The man who captured this in Campbell River thought the bird was drowning at first until it hopped up on a log to eat its dinner. One eagle expert tells us they get lots of calls about waterlogged birds that people are very concerned about, but all they need is a few hours to dry out.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace, installing the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
Johanna Wagstaff is taking the night off, so Amy Bell is here with our BC-wide forecast. And Amy, nice to see and feel the sun again today.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we ended up with a pretty gorgeous day on our hands. We started off with that cloud and a very slight dusting of some drizzle early this morning, but then it did brighten up. And over the last few hours, we've seen things, remarkably clear, really across the province. That will change overnight. We will see some developing cloud, and then tomorrow, a definite transition day for much of the province. We'll see some precipitation coming in, especially along the north and central coast, and then further up north, even a risk of some very light snow early in the morning. The majority of the precipitation, though, for most areas of the province will be early in the morning, and then we head into this clearing pattern. What we have setting up finally, though, is a ridge of high pressure, and this will be our first real run of the season where we get into those very warm temperatures. We're going to see a huge jump. By the end of the week, we're looking at temperatures in the mid-20s as you're heading inland. They won't stay this way. We still have many months before we really get into that hot, hot weather, but this is our first taste of that real sort of late spring, early summer-like weather. So Friday and Saturday, mark that on your calendars. You'll want to head to the beach or to a patio if you can. For tomorrow, though, as I mentioned, we're not out of the woods yet in terms of cooler and wetter weather, especially on the island. So Comox, Tofino, dealing with some showers. Victoria, though, you'll see mainly sunny conditions by the afternoon. Unsettled in Whistler, and you'll see some morning showers in Abbotsford before it dries up. But then further east, you're going to find those showers lingering throughout the day with those temperatures in the mid-teens. Quite wet for Prince Rupert. Dease Lake, you'll see some flurries early in the morning, and then as we head towards the Okanagan and the Kootenays, things do brighten up. But here you can see we are setting up for a gorgeous stretch of weather. Sort of peak heat will be Friday and Saturday in the mid to high 20s inland, and Sunday cools off a little bit. But we're going to stick with the sunshine, and then into next week, we'll see those temperatures coming down a bit, and we'll return to some precipitation. But get out there and enjoy it. It's going to be lovely.
Certainly going to be different. Thanks very much, Amy. And that's your late news for Tuesday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news at any hour, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. It starts tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. Good night.